Hey everyone, this is Justin with MyManJustins Collectible Emporium, and I'm your man for Pokemon Metaphysics and Philosophy. Today we're going to get into video number 2 on my Pokémon Master series. In the Pokemon Master series, we go deep into the Pokemon, what I call spheres of influence and what they represent, and how this is something that people on the Pokemon Master journey, or the hero's journey, or the Renaissance man would want to understand to better navigate that path and journey they go on. So the first Pokemon we're going to talk about today is Suicune. And Suicune is the Aurora Pokemon. Now, Aurora, I think, can speak to the concept in general of natural phenomena, but more specifically, we can think about the Aurora Borealis. And the Aurora Borealis is a beautiful display of lights, and it occurs through disturbances in the magnetosphere, and we'll talk about that too, that what happens is particles are ionized or charged, and this causes the light in the magnetosphere to emit in various ways that in the end results in that beautiful display of lights. So now we talked about the magnetosphere, and that is something that Magnemite represents. It represents magnetism itself, or magnetospheres, and magnetism is something that we could probably make a whole hour video on because it's such a interesting concept. If anyone's used a magnet, it's quite interesting to have what feels like this field of influence around magnetized objects, and it's totally unseen. So there's forces in the world that are completely unseen yet act on objects. And that's what Magnemite represents here. And remember, we're just going to be going into general concepts. If anything sparks your interest, I would encourage you on your Pokemon Master journey to check out some videos or writings to understand these concepts deeper. But just to note one thing about magnetism is that the magnetosphere around the Earth, for example, is what prevents solar winds from the sun, for example, from totally making Earth uninhabitable for us. So because of the magnetosphere, we are able to live in a habitable area. Next up, we have Ampharos, which is a light Pokemon. And light is a very interesting phenomena. It is actually electromagnetic radiation, technically, and light's interaction with that can cause things like the Aurora Borealis. Now, there's many theories that go around to try to understand or describe light. Modern theories rely on a more atomistic model, and they describe it in terms of photons and talk about the wave-particle duality. The photon itself really is just a theoretical understanding so that it can be plugged in to things like equations to better understand it. There's also other types of interpretations of light that include the idea of it as like a coaxial circuit that propagates through the medium of what they call the ether. So there actually is various and diverse interpretations of what light is, but it definitely is still a mystery and not fully understood. As a matter of fact, when I was going to UC Berkeley and I was working in the physics department, I was part of the CMB polar bear team, and what we were doing was we were analyzing the light from the beginning of the universe, from the moment of creation when it started with a burst of light. There is actually an afterglow in the sky that we can see all around us, and what they call that is the CMB, or cosmic microwave background. And what we were doing is we were creating a telescope to study this light, this CMB light, to understand how the universe came to be, how space itself expanded, and especially rapidly expanded in the beginning. Now, speaking of math, to understand abstract concepts, we have Unknown, which is the symbol Pokemon. Now, symbols are something that are used to understand abstract concepts, and we see that in math. Speaking of math, using the idea of the photon to be able to quantify the idea of light for math equations, we have things even in the Pokemon world, such as the delta species. In math, the symbol of delta is used to represent change, for example, change over time in calculus. And that's why we can understand the delta species Pokemon as the changed Pokemon. We can see their energy types are changed. And also, the idea of language and communication itself is comprised of symbols. Now think of the word Pokemon. Now, it is just a bunch of randomly created symbols to create the sound Pokemon. And the sound itself, I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculous when you break it up like that, but we are able, through the use of symbols, to transduce these meanings. So you know when I say this bunch of crazy sounds, you know, you're able to know that I'm talking about Pokemon. Talking about these. Next up, we have this Holo Promo Mew. And Mew represents the new species Pokemon. And this can represent the spheres of influence in life, such as taxonomy, which is the classification and identifying of different species of animals, but also things like evolutionary biology to understand the commonalities between those classifications. It's interesting to note that according to researchers, there is about 1 million different species in the ocean, and it is estimated that only 1/3 to 2/3 of them are known. So that leaves a very large amount of species that have not even been discovered yet, and that is what Mew represents. It represents the exploration to identify, understand, and classify new species of animals and to better understand them. Next we have this Neogenesis Slowking, and Slowking is the royal Pokemon. Now the definition for royal is having the status of a king or queen. So I think that's interesting to think about because we can see that not just in like literal kings and queens and monarchies, but in a more practical sense in everyday society. We see this in hierarchical competence systems, and this is part of the Pokemon Master's journey to become a master or to become competent in a specific or many spheres of influence to rise up through the ranks, and that's what we see in the idea of kings. Elvis was called the king of rock and roll because he, through his diligence and skill and talent and competence, he rose to that rank. He ended up with that title of the king of that sphere of influence in life, rock and roll. Next, we have this holographic Tyranitar from Neo Discovery. And Tyranitar is the armor Pokemon. And it's important to note that the Tyranitar is a dark type. So we have armor within the dark influence of life, of the journey, of the Pokemon Master's journey. So I think this is just a reminder again to be on guard against spheres of influence that are not beneficial for the individual who is on the journey, and just to be prepared, to be aware of, and not to be taken by surprise, to have your armor on and ready to go when you travel through. And this also goes into the next Pokemon, which is Feraligatr. Feraligatr is the big jaw Pokemon. So the idea of the big jaw is being able to take a hit. So when you're kind of traveling through and there comes times where you can't avoid situations that are not beneficial for you, but to be able to stand and continue on that path, to be able to kind of take that hit, to not have a glass jaw, but to have a nice big Feraligatr jaw there, and be able to take that hit and continue to move forward. Next, we have this first edition Steelix. Now, this is a very complex Pokemon sphere of influence in life because it takes two different spheres of influence and mixes them into one Pokemon. And what it is the Iron Snake Pokemon. So if we break that down, we have snakes. Now, snakes are one of the oldest mythological concepts that we know of. It can represent fertility, immortality. It can represent evil. It can represent rebirth, eternity. So the snake is something that is also known to be a carnivorous predator, and something that humans are often wary of because they can be poisonous, and there's something that we might even have a long evolutionarily negative disposition toward. Now, we also have the idea of iron. Now, iron is something interesting, and it also speaks to the spheres of influence of chemistry and also geology, because the understanding of iron, the chemical Fe, it actually happens to be the most abundant element on Earth. It makes up most of the Earth's crust. And also, iron is something that doesn't burn. As a matter of fact, when stars fuse, they use nuclear fusion to burn elements to stay lit. Once they get to the point where they don't have any more elements to burn and they start fusing iron, that's actually when they die. So iron is the last thing that they are able that they get to before the end of the star's life comes, and they either just die out and burn out, or sometimes they explode, depending on the star. I think this can also represent the transition of life from different stages. For example, the use of iron to make metals was the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, the Industrial Age. Also, so now we get to the point where we have these two concepts. We have iron and snake. So it's kind of a complex Pokemon to understand, and for each individual, you're going to be able to make your own meanings from it. But I feel like it speaks to the long-held mythological nature of life, how it's ever changing, but its constituent elements kind of remain over time and must be kind of contended with and understood as the Pokémon Master continues on their journey. Next, we have this Black Star promo, Holo Cool Porygon. Now, Porygon is the virtual Pokemon, and I think this speaks to the sphere of influence in life of technological innovation itself and scientific progress. It also combines understandings of Ampharos, or light, as well as unknown, or symbols, because fundamentally, when you view things in a virtual world, you are viewing a light communication. The light signals are signaled by ones and zeros, or on and off. Those are then transduced to meaningful symbols in which we understand, and then we are able to find meaning through the virtual communication. So really what it is, it's symbolic communication of light. That's what the virtual world is, and that's what we interact with. And I think Porygon represents that, and also combines the understandings of unknown and Ampharos. The last Pokemon we have here is Wobbuffet. Now, Wobbuffet is the patience Pokemon, and I think patience is something very relevant right now, especially in the time of Porygon, where we receive information literally at the speed of light. Now, it's important to note that it is a psychic type Pokemon, so that's the mental sphere of influence of life. So patience is something we can cultivate, and I think it's something very necessary, because life isn't just about Porygon or the virtual world. That's just one sphere. Remember, the Pokemon represent, and the Pokemon Master represent, being able to understand all the individual spheres and not completely immerse into one, but to be able to contend with all of them. That's the path of the Pokemon Master. And Wobbuffet represents the concept of patience, and this is something very important for the Pokemon Master, because the Pokemon Master's journey is a lifelong journey, and without the concept of patience to understand and contend with the sphere of patience in one life, it would be very hard to continue on a lifelong journey. So that's all we're going to do today. I hope you found that insightful and saw some cards that you thought were nice, maybe you would like to collect. They're available at my store, MyManJustin. Also, I hope you maybe found out about some spheres of influence that you thought were interesting that you might want to look up more on to actually get a more deep understanding rather than this kind of just surface level understanding. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you on my next video, and I will be taking off from my apartment on the 24th, so that's just in 2 days. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I will be broadcasting that journey as well.